"We don't have time for you anymore, Margaret." My daughter-in-law said it so casually you would have thought she was talking about canceling a dentist appointment instead of dismissing a 70-year-old woman from her own family. The restaurant around us stayed loud with laughter and clinking wine glasses, but all I could hear was the silence that followed her words. Ethan looked down at his plate. My son didn't defend me. He didn't even look surprised. That was the moment I realized I had already disappeared from my own family long before that dinner ever happened. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The dinner was supposed to celebrate Chloe's acceptance into a private middle school in Newport Beach. Vanessa had chosen one of those expensive oceanfront restaurants in Laguna where every plate looked too small and every glass of wine cost more than a grocery trip. I had spent an hour getting ready that evening. At my age, I no longer cared much about impressing strangers, but I still wanted my family to look at me with warmth. I wore the cream-colored sweater Ethan bought me 10 years earlier, back when he still remembered my birthday, without Facebook reminders. I even curled my silver hair carefully the way my late husband used to like. The California sunset outside the windows painted everything gold, but our table felt cold from the moment I sat down. Vanessa spent most of dinner scrolling through her phone. Ethan kept talking about work, barely pausing long enough to ask me how I'd been. Chloe smiled politely at me once or twice before disappearing back into her own world. I tried to join the conversation anyway. Mothers do that. We keep trying long after everyone else has stopped noticing. "I found those old Disneyland photos from when Ethan was little," I said softly while they waited for dessert. "You should have seen him on Space Mountain. He cried the entire time, but begged to go again." I laughed quietly at the memory, but no one laughed with me. Vanessa sighed and reached for her purse. Ethan checked his watch. "We're just really busy these days," Vanessa said without looking up. "Between work, Chloe's schedule, and everything else, we honestly don't have time for extra obligations anymore." Extra obligations. I stared at the candle flickering between us. 38 years of motherhood reduced to something that sounded inconvenient. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and tired. "She just means life's hectic right now, Mom." But he still wouldn't meet my eyes. The waiter arrived with dessert menus, unaware that something inside me had quietly cracked open. I looked around the table I had once dreamed of building my whole life around. My son, my granddaughter, the family I spent decades protecting. And suddenly I saw it clearly. Every unanswered call, every canceled holiday, every lunch postponed until next week. They hadn't been busy. They had simply been slowly learning how to live without me. Vanessa smiled tightly and stood to leave. "We should get going before traffic gets bad." I nodded as if everything were normal, as if my chest didn't feel hollow, as if I hadn't just realized I was no longer part of the people I loved most. Outside, the Pacific Coast Highway shimmered with headlights and ocean mist. I walked alone to my old Lexus parked near the curb, while my family climbed into Ethan's black SUV without asking if I wanted help driving home at night. Chloe waved once through the window. Then they were gone. I sat behind the wheel for a long time without starting the engine. The leather smelled faintly like the lavender hand cream I always kept in the console. My hands rested quietly on the steering wheel while the tears I refused to shed burned behind my eyes. Somewhere nearby, waves crashed softly against the California shore. And for the first time in my life, I understood that loneliness did not begin when people leave you. It begins the moment they stop seeing you while standing right in front of you. The drive back to Sacramento felt longer than usual that night. California traffic crawled along the interstate, while headlights blurred through my windshield like distant stars. I kept the radio off. Silence felt more honest somehow. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the neighborhood had already gone dark except for a porch light across the street and the faint blue glow of televisions flickering behind closed curtains. I sat in my car for several minutes before getting out, staring at the small craftsman house Ethan once called home. The white paint along the porch railing was beginning to peel again. Harold would have fixed it before I even noticed. My late husband never let little things stay broken for long. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside to the same quiet that had greeted me every night since he died 3 years earlier. The house smelled faintly like cedar and the lemon furniture polish I still used every Sunday morning out of habit. I slipped off my shoes carefully and placed my purse on the kitchen counter beside the bowl of peaches I forgot to refrigerate before dinner. One of them had already started to bruise. Little things seem to spoil faster these days. I changed into my old blue cardigan and heated water for tea, even though it was nearly 11 o'clock. Sleep had become difficult after Harold passed. The nights felt too large now, too empty. While the kettle warmed, I wandered into the living room and stopped in front of the bookshelf where dozens of framed family photos still stood exactly where I had arranged them years ago. Ethan at 12 holding his first baseball trophy. Ethan graduating from college in Berkeley. Ethan dancing with me at his wedding while Vanessa smiled beside us and silk and pearls before life hardened something inside her. I stared at that photo longer than the others. Back then, I believed becoming a mother-in-law meant gaining another daughter. I did not know some women entered families like visitors entering hotels. Temporary smiles. Careful performances. Always keeping one hand near the exit. The kettle whistled softly. I poured hot water into my favorite mug, the one Chloe painted for me when she was 8 years old. The letters Grandma were crooked and fading now. I wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic and sat alone at the kitchen table where 4 chairs remained even though only one was ever used anymore. Outside the window, rain tapped gently against the glass. Northern California winters always carried that cold dampness that settled deep into old bones. I reached for my phone and checked it without thinking. No messages. No calls asking if I made it home safely. Nothing from Ethan. Nothing from Chloe. I told myself families grew busy. People had careers, school schedules, appointments, soccer practice, traffic, endless obligations. But deep down, another truth had started whispering to me lately. People make time for what matters to them. Slowly, memories began surfacing one after another like old receipts falling from a drawer. Thanksgiving 2 years ago when Ethan canceled dinner an hour before because Vanessa suddenly decided they needed a quiet holiday. Christmas morning when Chloe opened gifts over video call because they said the drive to Sacramento was too exhausting. My 70th birthday last spring when Ethan sent flowers through an app but never came himself. Every disappointment had arrived wrapped in polite explanations. Every exclusion delivered with soft voices and apologetic smiles. That was the clever part. Nobody ever did anything cruel enough to sound unforgivable out loud. They simply erased me little by little until even my absence felt normal. I carried my tea into the hallway and paused outside the guest room Chloe used to sleep in during summer weekends. The pink blanket still rested folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Her stuffed rabbit sat against the pillows exactly where she left it years ago. She used to run through this house barefoot at 6 in the morning begging me to make Mickey Mouse pancakes. Now she barely answered my texts with more than one-word replies. Teenagers change, I reminded myself. But even that excuse sounded weaker lately. I turned off the hallway light and stood there in darkness for a moment, listening to the old grandfather clock tick steadily near the stairs. Tick, 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 time moving forward whether anyone noticed or not. Then I realized something painful. My family had not abandoned me all at once. They had simply stopped reaching for me whenever life became full. And eventually, they stopped reaching at all. The next morning, Sacramento woke beneath a gray winter sky that made everything look washed clean and tired at the same time. I stood in my kitchen wearing thick wool socks and watched rain slide slowly down the backyard windows while the coffee maker sputtered beside me. Harold used to say rainy mornings were perfect for staying home and making pancakes. After 41 years of marriage, certain memories stopped feeling like memories at all. They became part of the house itself, part of the walls. I carried my coffee into the den and sat in Harold's old recliner with a blanket over my knees. The local morning news played softly in the background, though I barely listened. My attention drifted instead toward my phone resting silent on the side table. Every morning for years, I had started my day checking for messages from Ethan or Chloe. A photo from school, a quick question, a request for help. Something small to remind me I still belonged somewhere in their busy lives. That morning there was nothing except a pharmacy reminder and an email advertisement for orthopedic shoes. I almost laughed at that. Apparently, even the internet remembered my age better than my family did. Around 10 o'clock, I opened Facebook on my tablet mostly out of habit. Social media had become one of the few ways grandparents like me stayed connected anymore. I scrolled past vacation photos, political arguments, recipes I would never cook, and advertisements for retirement communities near Palm Springs. Then I saw Vanessa's newest post. Family brunch with my favorite people. The photo showed Ethan smiling beside Chloe at a cafe in Napa Valley. Vanessa sat between them wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream-colored coat I recognized from Christmas 2 years ago. The table overflowed with waffles, fresh fruit, mimosas, and sunlight. Everyone looked relaxed, happy, whole. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because they went somewhere without me. Families did that sometimes. What hurt was realizing I had not even known they were taking the trip. Ethan used to call me for every little thing. At 23, he phoned asking how long chicken should stay in the oven. At 29, he called from Home Depot, confused about paint colors. After Harold died, he promised me over and over that I would never be alone. "You are still my home, Mom," he told me at the funeral while holding my hand beside the cemetery flowers. I believed him then. Maybe because grief makes people honest for a little while. I clicked through more photos from Vanessa's page and suddenly noticed something strange. There were dozens of family gatherings from the past 2 years I had never seen before. Pumpkin patches, beach picnics, birthday dinners, Sunday barbecues at friends' houses. In almost every photo, Vanessa's parents appeared smiling beside Ethan and Chloe like permanent fixtures in their lives. I did not resent them. They seemed kind enough whenever we met. But slowly a painful realization settled into me. They were building memories together while I remained outside the frame, completely unaware it was happening. My chest tightened as I continued scrolling. Then I found the picture that finally made me put the tablet down. Chloe stood in front of a school project holding a large poster board titled My Family Tree. Vanessa had proudly posted it 3 months earlier. I leaned closer to the screen. Ethan's name appeared there. Vanessa's too. So did Vanessa's parents. Their dog even had a little paw print near the bottom. But my name was nowhere. Not once. I stared at that poster while the coffee in my hands turned cold. Perhaps Chloe forgot. Perhaps it was innocent. But children usually write down the people they hear mentioned most often. And suddenly I wondered how often my name was even spoken inside their house anymore. I set the tablet aside carefully and walked to the kitchen sink. Outside, rain continued dripping from the maple tree Harold planted the year Ethan turned 10. The branches looked thinner now, older somehow. I pressed my hands against the counter and tried to steady myself against a truth I no longer wanted to ignore. Nobody had officially pushed me out of the family. There had been no screaming fight, no dramatic betrayal, just years of quiet omissions, missed invitations, forgotten calls, photos taken without me, memories created somewhere else while I stayed home, waiting to be included next time. And the worst part was realizing how hard I had worked not to notice. That afternoon, I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic for the first time in almost a year. The air smelled like dust, cardboard, and old wood warmed by winter sunlight pressing against the roof. Harold always joked that our attic was less of a storage space and more of a museum dedicated to Ethan's childhood. He was not entirely wrong. Every stage of my son's life still lived up there in carefully labeled boxes. Soccer trophies wrapped in newspaper, crayon drawings folded inside school folders, tiny sneakers with worn-out soles from the summer Ethan refused to stop running through sprinklers. I stood quietly beneath the hanging light bulb and suddenly remembered something I had not thought about in years. Ethan was 9 when Harold lost his job at the printing company. Those were hard years. Sacramento was expensive even back then, and we spent nearly 8 months barely staying ahead of overdue bills. Harold drove deliveries at night, while I worked double shifts at a diner off Interstate 80 pouring coffee for truck drivers and exhausted nurses. Ethan never knew how bad things really became. We made sure of that. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table after midnight balancing checkbooks while Harold rubbed his tired eyes beside me. Sometimes we had just enough money for groceries or gas, but not both. Once, I sold my mother's gold bracelet to cover Ethan's dental work after he cracked a tooth at baseball practice. Another winter, Harold wore the same thinning coat for 3 years because Ethan needed new cleats for school sports. We never called those sacrifices back then. That was simply what parents did. I opened one of the old storage bins and found a stack of school papers tied together with faded blue ribbon. On top sat an essay Ethan wrote in 5th grade titled My Hero. I sat carefully on the attic floor and unfolded the yellowing paper with trembling hands. My hero is my mom because she works harder than anyone I know. She smells like pancakes and coffee all the time because she wakes up before the sun. Even when she is tired, she still helps me with homework and never forgets my lunch. One day I want to buy her a big house near the ocean because she deserves to rest. I stopped reading for a moment because my eyes had started burning again. Funny how memories sneak up on you when you least expect them. I could still see that little boy so clearly. Ethan at 11 running toward me after baseball games with grass stains on his uniform. Ethan at 16 learning to drive in empty church parking lots, while Harold nervously gripped the dashboard. Ethan sleeping in hospital chairs beside me after my gallbladder surgery because he did not want me waking up alone. Somewhere along the way, life hardened him into someone I barely recognized. Or perhaps adulthood simply revealed parts of him I never wanted to see before. I reached deeper into the box and found an old photograph from Ethan's college graduation at Berkeley. Harold stood proudly beside him, wearing his only suit while I smiled between them, holding a bouquet of blue and gold balloons. Looking at that picture now felt strange because I remembered exactly what happened afterward. Ethan introduced us to Vanessa that same evening during dinner at a crowded Italian restaurant near campus. She was beautiful in that polished California way. Smooth blonde hair, perfect white teeth, expensive handbag resting beside her chair. She shook my hand warmly and called me sweet within the first 10 minutes. Harold liked her immediately. I tried to. Over the years, though, I started noticing small things that never quite sat right with me. Vanessa always controlled holiday schedules. Vanessa always decided whose family gatherings mattered more. Vanessa had a talent for making exclusions sound reasonable. It is just easier this year. You know how stressful travel can be. We thought you might be too tired. Little phrases delivered with a sympathetic smile sharp enough to leave cuts you could not explain to anyone else. And Ethan slowly adapted himself around her the way rivers change shape around stone. I folded the essay carefully and held it against my chest while late afternoon sunlight filtered through the attic window in long golden lines. For years, I kept telling myself families changed naturally over time. Children grew busy. Grandchildren grew distant. Life moved on. But sitting there surrounded by the remains of Ethan's childhood, I finally allowed myself to admit something painful. Love had never disappeared from me. I was not the one who stopped trying. 3 days later, I met my old friend Helen Brooks for lunch at a small cafe near the Sacramento River. The place overlooked the water and served tomato soup in thick ceramic bowls that always arrived too hot to eat right away. Helen and I had known each other for almost 30 years. We met through church when our sons were still young and covered in grass stains every Sunday afternoon. Life pulled us in different directions over the years, but widowhood had a strange way of reconnecting women, especially women who suddenly found themselves sitting alone at tables once built for families. Helen arrived wearing a camel-colored coat and silver earrings shaped like tiny leaves. She hugged me tightly before sliding into the booth across from mine. "You look tired," she said gently after studying my face for a moment. I smiled automatically. I suppose 70 will do that to a person. But Helen did not laugh. Some people grow softer with age. Helen had grown sharper. She stirred cream into her coffee slowly while watching me over the rim of her cup. "No," she said quietly. "Loneliness does that to a person." Her words settled heavily between us because they were true. The waitress brought our lunch, but neither of us touched it right away. Rain clouds drifted low over the river outside, while jazz music played softly through hidden speakers. Around us, younger people typed on laptops and laughed over salads that cost $18. Everyone seemed busy living lives that still stretched endlessly ahead of them. Helen finally leaned forward. "Tell me what is really going on with Ethan and Vanessa." I opened my mouth to defend them automatically. Mothers are trained to do that even when our hearts are breaking. "They are just busy," I began. Helen raised one eyebrow. "Margaret," that single look dissolved something inside me. Before I realized it, the truth started spilling out quietly across the table. The canceled dinners, the missed holidays, the family photos I only saw online afterward. The dinner in Laguna when Vanessa said they no longer had time for me. Helen listened without interrupting, her expression growing sadder with every sentence. When I finally stopped speaking, the soup in front of me had gone cold. Helen sat back slowly and folded her hands together. "I need you to hear something," she said carefully. "People who love you do not make you feel tolerated." I stared down at my untouched lunch while her words echoed painfully inside me. Tolerated. That was exactly how I felt lately. Like an obligation everyone hoped would quietly shrink on its own. Helen sighed softly and looked toward the river. After Daniel died, my daughter treated me the same way for almost 2 years. I looked up in surprise. Helen rarely spoke about her family anymore. Melissa? I asked quietly. Helen nodded once. At first it was subtle. She stopped inviting me to things. Then she only called when she needed babysitting or money for the kids. Every conversation became transactional. Her mouth tightened slightly around the last word. One day I realized something humiliating. I was rearranging my entire life around people who only remembered me when they needed something. The waitress refilled our coffee cups while silence settled over the table again. Outside, rainwater rippled across the river in uneven circles. Helen wrapped both hands around her mug before speaking again. Margaret, there is a difference between being needed and being loved. Sometimes we confuse the two because motherhood trains us to survive on usefulness. I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. No one had ever said it that plainly before. Suddenly, dozens of memories rearranged themselves inside my mind with painful clarity. Ethan calling because Chloe needed emergency pickup from school. Vanessa asking if I could watch the dog during vacations. Last-minute requests to help cover expenses when Ethan switched jobs 2 years earlier. Every interaction carried a purpose now, a function, but very rarely affection. Helen reached across the table and touched my hand gently. You are still acting like they will notice your pain and suddenly change, she said. But people get comfortable receiving love they never have to earn. I looked out the window at the gray California afternoon while her words settled heavily into my chest. Somewhere deep down, a quiet realization had already begun forming long before this lunch. I had spent years making excuses for behavior that would have broken my heart if I saw it happen to someone else. The hardest part was not admitting they hurt me. The hardest part was admitting they probably knew they did. After my lunch with Helen, I stopped calling first. It sounds small when I say it out loud now, almost childish. But for mothers like me, silence does not come naturally. We spend decades reaching out before anyone asks us to. We remember birthdays, weather changes, doctor appointments, favorite meals, school recitals, and every tiny detail that makes another person feel loved. Stopping felt less like setting a boundary and more like learning how to breathe underwater. The first few days were strange. Every morning, I picked up my phone automatically before setting it back down again. Around noon, I would think about texting Ethan to ask how work was going or whether Chloe enjoyed her science presentation at school. Then I would hear Helen's voice in my mind. People get comfortable receiving love they never have to earn. So I stayed quiet. And something surprising happened. Nothing. No one called asking why I seemed distant. No one noticed the absence of my usual messages filled with heart emojis and reminders to drive safely in the rain. Days passed with almost complete silence except for grocery store advertisements and robocalls about Medicare supplements. At first the quiet hurt terribly. Then slowly, it became clarifying. On Friday afternoon, Ethan finally called. For one foolish moment, my heart lifted the way it always used to when his name appeared on my screen. I answered on the second ring. Hey Mom, he said distractedly. I could hear traffic in the background and Vanessa speaking faintly somewhere nearby. Quick favor. Chloe has a school holiday Monday and Vanessa. And I both have meetings. Could you watch her for the day? I leaned back slowly in my kitchen chair and stared at the rain outside the window. Not hello. Not how are you doing. Not even acknowledgement of the painful dinner the week before. Just a request. I am sorry, sweetheart, I said calmly. I already have plans Monday. Silence followed immediately. Ethan sounded genuinely confused. Plans. The word landed strangely between us, as though the idea of me having my own life surprised him. Yes, I answered softly. I will be out most of the day. Another pause. Okay, he finally said, though disappointment sharpened his tone. I guess we will figure something out. Then he hung up. No warmth. No conversation. No attempt to continue talking. I sat there for several minutes afterwards staring at my dark phone screen, while something inside me shifted quietly into place. I had not lied to Ethan. Monday morning, Helen and I drove 2 hours toward Napa Valley and spent the day wandering through antique shops, bookstores, and tiny cafes with outdoor heaters glowing against the cold. We drank hot chocolate near Yountville, while soft jazz played overhead and tourists hurried past carrying expensive shopping bags. For the first time in years, I spent an entire day without waiting for someone else to need me. It felt unfamiliar at first, then strangely peaceful. Around 3 o'clock, My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Must be nice to disappear when people rely on you. I stared at the message while Helen studied old vinyl records nearby. No greeting. No kindness. Just irritation. I typed 3 different responses before deleting all of them. In the end, I simply put the phone back into my purse without replying at all. That evening, I returned home tired in the best possible way. The kind of tiredness that comes from actually living instead of waiting. I made myself grilled cheese and tomato soup, then sat near the fireplace with an old mystery novel Harold once loved. Halfway through chapter 4, another message arrived from Ethan. You could have told us earlier if you did not want to help. I read the sentence twice. Did not want to help. Not could not. Not. Had plans. In their minds, my time still belonged to them automatically unless proven otherwise. Suddenly dozens of moments from the past few years looked different to me. Last-minute babysitting requests because Vanessa wanted spa weekends with friends. Emergency dog-sitting during wine country vacations. Ethan dropping off paperwork at my house because he knew I would organize everything for him without complaint. They never asked whether I was tired, or lonely, or grieving. They simply assumed I would always remain available in the background like electricity or running water. Quiet, reliable, permanent. I set my phone face down on the coffee table and looked around the living room glowing softly beneath lamplight. Harold's old blanket rested folded over the couch arm. Rain tapped gently against the windows again. Somewhere deep inside me, something fragile but important had started growing for the first time in years. Not anger, not revenge, just the slow understanding that my life still belonged to me. 2 weeks passed before Ethan called again. By then, something inside me had grown quieter. Stronger too. I had settled into a new rhythm without even realizing it. Morning walks along the neighborhood trails. Coffee with Helen every Thursday. Afternoons spent reading beside the fireplace instead of staring at my phone waiting for messages that rarely came. The strange thing about loneliness is that once you stop chasing people who make you feel alone, the silence becomes less painful. That Tuesday evening, I was trimming rosemary in the backyard when my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed across the screen again. I wiped dirt from my hands before answering. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded rushed as usual. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Of course he did. I leaned against the porch railing quietly while cold February air carried the smell of wet grass through the yard. Vanessa and I are thinking about remodeling the kitchen, he continued. The contractor says we need about $15,000 more than expected to finish everything. There it was. Straight to the point. No conversation first. No interest in my life. Just another need wrapped in casual conversation. Years ago, I would have already been opening my checkbook before he even finished speaking. Harold and I had saved carefully our entire lives. Not because we were wealthy, but because we believed family should help family whenever possible. We paid part of Ethan's graduate school tuition, helped with the down payment on his first condo in San Jose, even contributed toward Chloe's private school when Ethan switched careers. Every sacrifice felt worthwhile back then because I believed generosity strengthened love. Now I was no longer sure. That sounds stressful, I said softly. Ethan exhaled heavily. Yeah, it is. So I was wondering if maybe you could help us out temporarily, just until we refinance later this year. Temporarily. Funny how adult children always used words like temporarily when speaking about money borrowed from parents. I stared across the backyard toward Harold's old vegetable garden, now resting empty beneath winter rain. I cannot do that this time, I answered calmly. Silence. Long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call had not dropped. What do you mean? Ethan finally asked. His voice sounded less hurt than confused, as though refusal itself felt unnatural coming from me. I mean, I am not comfortable giving out money right now. Another pause. Then a sharper tone entered his voice. Mom, it is not like we are asking for something unreasonable. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. Not gratitude. Expectation. I understand, I said quietly. But my answer is still no. In the distance, a dog barked somewhere down the street while rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters. Ethan sighed heavily into the phone. You have been acting really different lately. Different. The word almost made me smile. What he meant was unavailable. People change sometimes, I replied gently. Before Ethan could answer, Vanessa's voice appeared faintly in the background. I could not hear every word clearly, but I heard enough. What did she say? A pause. Then sharper this time. Seriously? After everything we have done for her? I felt something inside me go completely still. Not angry. Not even surprised anymore. Just clear. Over the years, I had cooked holiday dinners for 20 people while hiding my arthritis pain behind polite smiles. I babysat Chloe through stomach flu nights so Ethan and Vanessa could sleep before work. I drove 40 miles during a heat wave once because Vanessa forgot cupcakes for Chloe's classroom party. And somehow, in their version of reality, setting one boundary transformed me into the selfish one. Ethan lowered his voice when he returned to the call. Vanessa is upset. I gathered that. She thinks maybe you are pulling away from us on purpose. I looked up at the darkening Sacramento sky where clouds hung low and heavy above the rooftops. The answer came to me with surprising ease. No, Ethan, I said softly. I think I just stopped pretending everything was fine. Silence again. Real silence this time. The kind that arrives when someone hears a truth they were not prepared for. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, I should probably go. All right, I answered. Take care driving home. He muttered goodbye and ended the call. I slipped my phone back into my sweater pocket and stood alone in the backyard while evening settled around the neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on one by one across the street. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed during dinner through an open window. For the first time in a very long time, I realized something important. My family only panicked when access to me changed. Not because they missed my heart, because they missed my usefulness. The decision to leave came quietly. No dramatic moment. No screaming argument. No slammed doors or tearful speeches. Just a calm Tuesday morning in March while I stood watering the roses Harold planted 20 years earlier. Sacramento sunlight filtered softly across the backyard, warming the bricks beneath my slippers while birds moved through the lemon tree near the fence. I remember looking at the house and realizing it no longer felt like home. It felt like a waiting room. Every corner carried memories of people who no longer truly existed in my life the way they once had. I spent the next week moving through the house. Slowly, almost tenderly. Not grieving exactly. More like waking up. I opened closets I had not touched in years and donated boxes of dishes, coats, and decorations I no longer needed. I sorted through old papers at the dining room table while soft music played from Harold's ancient radio beside the kitchen. With every drawer I emptied, the house seemed to breathe easier somehow. So did I. Helen drove with me to Monterey one Friday afternoon after I found a small cottage for rent near the coast. It sat 3 blocks from the ocean on a quiet street lined with cypress trees and faded blue mailboxes. The place was modest. 1 bedroom, white shutters, tiny kitchen. But the moment I stepped inside and smelled salt air drifting through the windows, something deep inside me settled peacefully for the first time in years. I signed the lease that same day. Back in Sacramento, I contacted a realtor named Denise Walker who specialized in downsizing for retirees. Denise arrived wearing practical shoes and carrying a leather folder full of market reports. She walked carefully through the house while complimenting Harold's woodworking shelves and the garden out back. Homes like this move fast right now, she said gently while standing in the living room. Especially in neighborhoods this quiet. Quiet. Funny word. Quiet used to scare me after Harold died. Now it felt sacred. Within 2 weeks, the house was officially listed. I did not tell Ethan or Vanessa immediately. Part of me wondered if that made me cruel. But another part remembered all the vacations, holidays, and dinners I learned about after the fact through social media posts. Families who truly stay connected do not rely on announcements to know each other's lives. The first time Ethan found out something was changing came accidentally. He called one Sunday afternoon asking whether I could watch Chloe during spring break because he and Vanessa planned to visit Sonoma with friends. Actually, I answered softly while wrapping dishes in newspaper. That will not be possible. He sounded irritated immediately. Why not? I looked around the kitchen where half the cabinets already stood empty. Because I will be moving. That week. Silence filled the line so suddenly I could hear traffic humming faintly through his car speakers. Moving, he repeated slowly. What are you talking about? I sold the house, I said gently. Another long pause followed. You sold the house. This time his voice carried something new beneath the surprise. Panic. Why would you do that without talking to me first? I almost smiled at the question. Not because it was funny. Because it revealed everything. Ethan had not asked whether I was happy or healthy or afraid to move alone at 70 years old. His first concern was why he had not been consulted. It was my decision to make, I answered quietly. I heard Vanessa speaking in the background again, sharper this time. Ask her where she is going. Ethan lowered his voice. Mom, where exactly are you planning to live? I folded another plate carefully into the packing box before answering. Near Monterey. Monterey, he repeated. That is almost 3 hours away. I looked through the kitchen window toward Harold's garden glowing beneath afternoon sunlight. Yes, I said softly. I know. Ethan exhaled heavily. This feels really sudden. Sudden. Another strange word. As though years of loneliness had happened overnight instead of slowly across birthdays, holidays, missed calls, and empty chairs at dinner tables. No, I said after a moment. It only feels sudden because nobody noticed I was already leaving emotionally a long time ago. Neither of us spoke after that. I sealed the moving box with steady hands while silence settled heavily between us once again. Then Ethan muttered something about calling me later before ending the conversation. I stood alone in the half-empty kitchen listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and realized something important. For years, I thought losing my family would destroy me. But standing there surrounded by cardboard boxes and sunlight, I finally understood the truth. I had already survived the loneliest part. 3 months after moving to Monterey, I woke before sunrise almost every morning. The cottage near the coast had thin white curtains that glowed softly when dawn approached, and the sound of ocean. Waves traveled through the open windows like steady breathing. My new life was smaller than the one I left behind in Sacramento, but somehow it felt fuller. Simpler too. I bought fresh bread from the bakery on Lighthouse Avenue twice a week. I learned the names of stray cats that wandered near the fishing docks. I started volunteering at a little-used bookstore run by retired teachers who drank too much coffee and argued passionately about mystery novels. For the first time in years, my days belonged entirely to me. Some mornings I still thought about Ethan. Of course I did. Mothers do not stop loving simply because they finally stop chasing. But distance had changed something important inside me. The ache no longer controlled every quiet moment. One chilly April afternoon, I sat wrapped in a blanket on the cottage porch watching fog roll slowly across the shoreline when my phone rang unexpectedly. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello, sweetheart. His voice sounded strained immediately. Mom, why did Denise tell us the house sale already closed? I closed my eyes briefly. So they finally contacted the realtor. Because it did close, I answered calmly. 2 weeks ago. Another silence. Then Ethan spoke again, faster this time. Vanessa thought maybe you were just renting the place out temporarily. Nobody realized you were actually gone for good. Gone for good. Strange phrase. As though my presence had only become real once it disappeared completely. I moved to Monterey over a month ago. I reminded him gently. Yeah, but we did not think. His voice trailed off awkwardly. Did not think what? That I would truly leave? That I would eventually return once loneliness scared me enough? In the background, I heard Vanessa speaking again, lower this time, but tense. Ethan sighed heavily. Chloe has been asking about you. I looked toward the ocean where gulls circled above the waves in the fading afternoon light. I miss her very much. Then why are you making this so difficult? The question landed softly, but revealed everything. Even now, Ethan still believed distance existed because I created it suddenly. Not because years of neglect built it piece by piece. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders against the cold coastal wind. Do you really want to know? I asked quietly. Silence answered me. Then finally, yes. I looked down at my hands resting in my lap. Older hands now. Veins visible beneath thin skin. Hands that packed school lunches at dawn for 20 years. Hands that held Ethan through fevers, heartbreaks, failures, funerals, and every difficult season in between. You did not lose me all at once, I said softly. You lost me slowly. Every canceled holiday. Every ignored phone call. Every time I became useful instead of loved. Ethan did not interrupt this time. So I continued. I kept waiting for someone to notice I was lonely. But instead, everyone just got comfortable with my silence. The only sound between us was the distant crash of waves outside my porch. After a long pause, Ethan finally spoke again, and for the first time in years, he sounded younger somehow. Less certain. I did not realize things had gotten that bad. I believed him. That was the tragedy of it all. Cruelty is easier to recognize than indifference. At least cruel people notice your pain. I know, I answered gently. More silence followed. Then Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. Vanessa thinks maybe we should all come visit sometime. I smiled faintly at the ocean ahead of me. Somewhere in Sacramento, panic had finally transformed into reflection. But healing arrives slowly in families that spent years avoiding uncomfortable truths. Maybe someday, I said softly. But not yet. Ethan sounded disappointed, though not angry this time. Just sad. Okay. We spoke for another few minutes about Chloe's school and the unusually cold spring weather before ending the call quietly. No argument. No dramatic reconciliation either. Just two people finally speaking honestly after years of pretending. That evening, I walked alone along the Monterey shoreline while the sky turned lavender above the Pacific Ocean. Couples held hands nearby. Children chased gulls through the sand. Somewhere behind me, restaurant windows glowed warmly against the dusk. I stopped near the water's edge and listened to the waves rolling endlessly toward shore. For most of my life, I believed love meant staying available no matter how invisible you became. But standing there beneath the California sky with cold ocean wind against my face, I finally understood something different. Peace does not come from forcing people to choose you. Sometimes peace begins the moment you finally choose yourself.